Well, welcome back to another first ride review with me, James from Glidden Yamaha, down in Devon. Now this morning I'm on what is, for me personally, probably the most anticipated bike of 2025. It was the R9, but as we won't likely be getting that for stock until 2026, then this is my new front runner, which is the Tenere 700, which has just arrived on demo at our dealership. Got PDI'd yesterday, took it home last night, and I'm currently riding it back into work this morning. Now, I'm a big Tenere fan myself. I've had 3 of the bikes since they relaunched as a 700 in 2019. In fact, I'd actually pre-ordered the model when it first was announced. And this is the first, well, in my opinion, definitely the first big update on the bike since it was launched back in 2019. It had a bit of an update where they updated to an LCD dash and added some LED indicators and changed the ABS switch on it, for example. But other than that, the bike has stayed largely the same until now. And the first big update to this bike is the fact that we have moved the CP2 engine, which has happened on the MT-07 as well. That has moved over to a ride-by-wire or electronic throttle from the good old-fashioned cable throttle. Now, whether this is just a design decision to move the CP2s or whether they've decided to do it as part of Euro 5 emissions, for example, I don't know. But it does open up a whole bunch of new options on these bikes. Now, the thing with the Tenere is that they are built upon simplicity. That is part of the reason why they have sold so well. Whereas every other manufacturer has filled their adventure bikes with electronics and gadgets and gizmos, Yamaha has stayed as raw as they can with these bikes. Okay, so the big controversial talking point of this bike is the added electronics. Now, the CP2 motor, which is across a whole range of Yamaha bikes, has moved to ride-by-wire for 2025. So we've seen that in the 2025 MT-07 and now also the Tenere 700. Now, whether that is just a decision, a design choice to bringing the CP2 up to date with everyone else, or whether that's something to help with emissions, for example, on the Euro 5 Plus, I don't know. But it's been done. What it does open these bikes up to, though, is to have these electronic additions. Now, the crux of that with the Tenere is the fact that it has built its reputation on simplicity, whereas other manufacturers on their adventure bikes have added electronic packages and rider modes and cruise control and all these other things that you could argue are more things to go wrong when you're out in sticks. Yamaha has stayed simple and clean with the Tenere. Good old cable throttle. You can easily replace a cable if you're stuck in the desert. But whether you like it or not, this new CP2 motor is electronic or ride-by-wire. And in the first instance, I've got to say, the throttle delivery is so smooth on this bike. It is lovely. And this is coming from owning a 2024 Tenere Extreme myself. I don't have a problem with that throttle. I know some people have had issues where they find the throttle a bit snatchy, especially if you're used to riding a ride-by-wire throttle, of which most bikes are, and then you move over to cable. But on this new Tenere, the throttle delivery is really nice. Now, that's not the only thing that they've added. You also get rider modes. Another quick look at the bay. It's beautiful today. Cruise ship over there, if you can see that. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So rider modes. It's a bit funny to change them. So you press the rider mode button, and basically what you have is you have sport and you have Explore. And that really is it. So they have kept it as clean as they can. Now you'll notice down on the dash that while I've got a bit of throttle on, it won't let me do anything. The second I take the throttle away, it highlights that I can change between Sport, which is full power, and Explore, which is a reduced power. Now, there is a bit of a difference between the two. I would say that on Sport, it's not... snatchy is the wrong word, because that's just harkening back to the old cable throttle. It's not more snatchy, I would say it's more responsive, whereas the Explore is a little bit more docile, which is going to be great if, for example, you're doing a bit of exploring off-road, especially if you're not quite so confident and you want the bike to behave a little bit more predictably. But we'll leave it in Sport. Your other options, you have your ABS and your traction control. And then you just press the mode button to switch that back off again. So while there are power modes, they are very, very basic. It's not like on an MT-09, for example, when changing the power mode changes a whole bunch of different things. It's just, do you want a bit of different power delivery? Or do you want to just ride as it is? Most people will probably pick one and stay with it, but it's there. Now the other thing as well that I mentioned briefly that is new on the Tenere is traction control. So before you just had ABS on the bike. You had ABS, which was 2-channel, and you could switch it off on the front or turn it off completely. Now you have traction control as well, which, as you can see in the rider modes, you can switch off if you want. Now I have noticed having the traction control lit even just on the way home, because on my Tenere before, again, you have no traction control, so you're used to the bike kind of responding in the way that it does. It's like just a big dirt bike, really. And there are a couple of moments, even on a nice, well, docile for me ride on the way home, that the traction control did kick in just ever so slightly. So from a road riding point of view, you've got an extra safety feature there which you didn't have before on the Tenere. From an off-road point of view, you can just switch it off, because as we know, traction control in the dirt can be a bit of a nightmare. So those are the additions that you get with the new electronic motor. Other optional things, as you can see here on our demo, we have fitted the quick shifter. Because we're electronic throttle, it is up and down shift, which is great, and it is Yamaha's 3rd generation. So as you can see, I have the throttle on, and it will let me, the green highlights where I can go. So I can shift up or I can shift down while I've got the throttle on. And again, when I've got the throttle off, I can still shift up and down. It's not quite as beautiful and as refined as, for example, on the MT-09 or the Tracers, but you are never going to get that on a CP2 motor. It is lovely to have though, and from an off-road point of view, having an up and down shifter like that is great. And I was also thinking, when are you really going to use that sort of 3rd generation option on the Tenere? And actually, if you've ever ridden off-road, especially on a big bike, and you're doing a hill climb, and you find that the climb is getting either a bit too steep, or you're running out of puff, or both, in say 2nd or 3rd gear, and you need to shift down, coming off the throttle to shift down loses your momentum and loses your traction massively. So simply having that option there to keep a bit of power on is great. So we're just going to stop here, do the obligatory YouTube cover photo. So let's do a quick walk around then. So as you can see, on the whole, it's not massively different at first glance from the previous generation. Frame's still the same, things like the bash plate is still the same, wheels, exhaust, but on closer inspection every single panel on this bike is brand new designed. The tail end, for example, is in 3 sections as opposed to 1 big section. Little things that, yes, while panels on road bikes are more expensive to replace, things like that means that you can replace this one smaller panel as opposed to a few big ones. New handguards. They are still plastic, but they are stronger than before, and they've got a new design shape on them. If you're off-roading, you'll probably still want to change that for a Barkbuster or an Acerbis or something. New headlights, new front cockpit. So these have got kind of a rectangular design as opposed to round as before, and this cockpit plastic is now 1 piece as opposed to 3. Still got the nice accessory crossbar on there to stick your phone or sat nav or something. A few little details for 2025 on the frame. These luggage points have been reinforced on the frame to be a bit stronger, because a lot of people obviously either use it for luggage or they put a grab handle on there, so lots of jerking and yanking. The side stand switch has been reinforced and they've added a cover to it, again from rider feedback, something that if you had a bad knock would stop your ride pretty early. And the exhaust bracket hanger has been reinforced. Now we're yet to take some panels off and have a little look and see how it's been reinforced, but that is to prevent it from bending in and marking the swing arm. That has been an issue on the previous generation. The engine casings on the CP2 have changed slightly, so this position on the clutch cable has moved from here to here, and also this cover is further in, which will be a big relief to some Tenere riders. The bigger pegs off the World Raid are now a standard on the bike, and you get a 1-piece rally seat instead of a 2-piece. So as we're bimbling down the seafront, let's go through the cockpit a bit more. So this button here is your ABS switch. Now before, on the previous generation, that was just an ABS on, so you had to go into the menu to turn the ABS off, and then once you got back on the road after you were riding off-road, you could quickly switch that back on. That is now a switch which you can switch the ABS on and off, which is a massive change for those that do trail ride their Teneres, particularly if you're green laning down here in the UK, when you've got a mix between road and off-road quite frequently. USB port, now that on the first generation was a 12-volt socket, moved up to a USB type A on the second generation, and now on the third generation it's a USB type C, which is what most devices run on these days. Now the big change here is the dash. So the dash is bigger. It looks to be a higher resolution as well. And it does look really lovely. I was a bit dubious of it at first. However, it does look smart. There's not a lot of configuration in here. If you go into the menu, your themes are pretty much the same as before. It doesn't want me to change them while I'm riding. That's an update. Anyway, you have this mode, which was on the previous generation, and then you have the street mode, which is where you have your revs in a little circle. But that is as far as it is from the theme configuration. Again, Yamaha are trying to keep this bike as clean and as simple as they can. So there's not an awful lot there. What they have added is increased connectivity from your phone. So before you could pair your phone and get incoming call and text notifications, which I don't actually use on my Extreme at all, but they have updated it this time, so you have increased connectivity, which adds turn-by-turn navigation. So it's not like on the M209 or the M207 where you get the full maps with the Garmin Street Cross app, but instead you use the Yamaha My Ride app and you just plan your route with Google Maps, and then you will get a little turn-by-turn navigation down there at the bottom, which I will pair up and do in my full proper review for the bike a bit later on. terms of information, it is basically exactly the same as last time. No, it is exactly the same as last time. And there's still no range to empty. You still get the fuel gauge, but there is no range for whatever reason on this bike still. Now, to complement the new computer is the new switchgear, which is Yamaha's new switchgear, which they've introduced on all their bikes since the MT-09 was introduced last year. It does take a little bit of getting used to, because the indicators, as you can see, are a different style to what really anyone's been used to. But after riding obviously a few of our demos for a while now, I've got to say it does work really nicely. It's comfortable, it's intuitive. It just, as with anything new, it just takes a second to get your head around it. It is a nice premium switchgear, a lot nicer than some of the other switch gears that have been introduced in the last year or two from other manufacturers. It seems that manufacturers are trying new things out on their switch gears. I think the Yamaha one is particularly nice. You've got all your computer stuff on here, little joystick and a menu button. You've got your pass light and your high beam on here, indicators, and then your horn and your hazards down there. It's really nice. So one of the biggest questions that was asked by myself and a lot of other Tenere riders was the position of this fuel tank. So Yamaha said when they announced the bike, there's lots of little differences that have added up to be a big change, big update on the bike. Now, one of them is the fuel tank. So it's still a 16-litre tank, but what they've done is they've moved it forward and they've moved it down. So what everyone was asking is, well, do you mean by 3mm or by 30 centimeters? You know, how far are we talking here? Because a tiny bit, as you know, manufacturers have a habit of doing, so that they can say that they've updated a bike, doesn't really count. But this has moved, I would say, semi-significantly. How well, I won't know until I get to ride this bike off-road. This is our demonstrator, so it won't be going off-road, but I am going up to the Yamaha off-road experience next month to ride these bikes off-road and get a proper feel for them. Obviously, I've spent a lot of miles on my previous generation Tenere, so I know how they feel, I know how they balance. But just sat on the bike on the road, the tank does immediately feel a lot lower. And another good way of looking at it is with regards to the yoke. So before, I used to, when I was trying to explain the differences between a single tank and the dual tank on the World Raid and the World Rally, for example, the dual tanks, while they're bigger and they're on either side, they sit lower on the bike, and you can see that because the top of the tank sit below the yoke on the bike, whereas on the standard Tenere, the top of the tank sits quite a bit higher than the yoke. And if you own a Tenere, you can have a look at this and see this. But as you can see here, the top of the tank is almost in line. Almost in line with the top of that yoke. And from a sitting point of view, because the seat height hasn't changed, even though it's moved to a new seat, the seat height hasn't changed. The tank feels further down and further away from me. So I think that will add up to a change that you'll experience when you're riding that bike, particularly off-road, and you'll feel the difference in the weight distribution, which is great. Really, really great. Final point on changes that are more off-road biased is the rear shock. Now, when we get off the bike, I will show you what's going on down there. So what they've essentially done is they've added a little arm off the bottom of the swing arm, and they've added a new linkage. So what that has done, that has increased the stroke of the rear shock, something which, with a standard suspension setup, was a bit of a niggle for some riders, particularly if you don't weigh 70 kilos. So what they've done is they've managed to increase the stroke without increasing the seat height on the bike. again, listening to rider feedback, all these little things that over the past 5 to 6 years, riders have picked up on and learnt from, and Yamaha obviously have learnt from as well. All of these things have added up to make a much nicer, well-rounded package for what these people have ridden these bikes for. And I imagine if, when these bikes sold, people didn't take them off-road and people just rode them on the road, then I imagine that this generation of Tenere would be a much more road-focused bike. But because the market responded to this bike by buying them and taking them in the dirt, and the massive proportion of riders that modified these bikes and did everything with them, I think that has resulted in a slightly more off-road focused machine. Good morning work, and good morning me. So just before we go, let's get a good look at that linkage down here. So you can see this bracket that comes down here and this new linkage on here, resulting in a nice long stroke on that rear shock. So final thoughts on this bike before I head to do a full review on the thing. I've only done about 20 miles on the thing, but I really enjoyed it. That throttle delivery is really peachy. The seat feels a fair bit comfier than the stock seat on the previous generation. The tank position is noticeable, which is a big relief for me. Would I trade my Extreme in for the new 2025 Rally? I think I'm going to leave that question for my full review. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give us a like and pop a comment down below of what you want to see in my full review, what questions you want me to ask about this bike in my full review. Then there'll be a full road review, and next month when I get up to the off-road centre, I'll have a full off-road review of this bike and the Rally as well. If you like what we're doing here and you do want to buy a bike from us, we are based down in Devon, but we do deliver nationwide. We've got our own delivery team and courier team. So if you like what we're doing and you really want to buy a bike from us, then just get in touch, and we'd love to help you out. See you in the next one.